Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe here with me, my co-host Stan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we're going to be doing a bit of a prelude to the Shadow Kingdom graphic novel podcast. We're going to cover the entire graphic novel in one video, but first we want to just touch upon Mark Finn's one essay that's right before it, because it kind of feels appropriate, because this is part of the graphic novel, and we're going to give our point of views on these things while we read it, because this is very fascinating reading. Of all the varied and fascinating characters that Robert E. Howard created, it seems that King Kull gets the short shrift more than others. A poor man's Conan, some would have you believe, or the early try, before Howard got it right, meaning the formula that made the swaggering Cimmerian such a success. L. Sprague de Camp said on more than one occasion that all of Howard's heroes were cut from the same cloth. And by that, he meant that they're largely interchangeable to the point that one could substitute guns for swords and voila, new Conan stories could be created. People have taken that statement at face value, even though it's patently false and a poor excuse to tamper with a dead author's canon. And while here sits Kull, brooding over his kingdom, and it would seem his status as a secondary character. However, there's a world of a difference between King Kull and Conan the Cimmerian. Differences in time and place, in outlook and demeanor, and most especially differences in authorial intent. Far from being a precursor to Conan, confused all the more by the way in which Howard himself created the Cimmerian, King Kull was always his own man, and served the needs of Robert E. Howard in more ways than one. We're just going to analyze real quick the first part of the statement where L. Sprague de Camp. This guy wrote pastiche novels of Conan, and yet he said all of Howard's characters are the same. You were basically writing glorified fan fiction of that character.
How short-sighted.
Because by insulting Howard, he's insulting himself.
Agreed.
You look at Solomon Kane, he's a different character from Conan. Conan's very different from Kull. Kull's a brooding character, and Kull is a character almost allergic to optimism, whereas Conan is a character who enjoys life for what it is. While Conan has his moments to brood, he does get some moments of pretty good contentedness. A lot of the stories end with him either displeased in some way or smiling, typically the smile. The difference is Kull ends most of his stories brooding even more than at the beginning. Very different temperaments. I'd argue, to an extent, Conan could be more compared to James Bond, to an extent. Kull more to Batman.
That's actually a really good comparison. The problem of the Camp, here it is, he's looking at it from a casual point of view.
A mere 5 years separates the creation of Kull and Conan. Howard wrote The Shadow Kingdom in 1927 and rewrote The Phoenix on the Sword in 1932. In that short span of time, a lot changed for Howard as a writer. Howard created Kull at the beginning of his own career, and ironically, Kull was at the end of his adventuring career. But both Howard and his literary hero king shared the same frustrations, i.e. being told what to do and how to do it by people they didn't like, respect, or trust. Each was willing and able to self-govern, but was subsequently hampered by, in Howard's case, that which was expected of him as a dutiful son. Howard's sense of obligation to his parents, especially his mother, utterly destroyed him as a human being. In a lot of ways, Howard is a more tragic Shakespearean or Greek tragedy style character than any of the characters he ever created. Or in Kull's case, the ancient sacred laws that bound a king's hands, an obstacle easily avoided by Kull's numerous enemies. Howard was under pressure from his family to get an education, which Howard didn't feel that he needed, as he had made his mind up that he wanted to write for a living. As a compromise to placate his parents, Howard took a bookkeeping course at the nearby college in Brownwood. This was to be a fallback profession in case the writing didn't work out. Howard hated school and barely managed to squeak by and graduate. That's actually a little funny because he had a genius IQ. His understanding of almost every field that he put his mind to was perfect. He was rather like Tolkien. I'd actually say he was probably the same IQ. The difference is Howard looked at education and didn't see the point. The difference in Howard and Tolkien is that Tolkien lost his mother when he was much younger and was raised by a priest with only one goal, for him to go into university. But Tolkien wanted to become a professor because professors in Britain made good money, because Tolkien had a sweetheart he wanted to essentially pay for her entire life, Edith. Howard did not have a sweetheart like Tolkien. King did, to an extent. He later got one for a short time, but they broke up. And Howard ended up, in his case, he just really didn't respect school. One has to compare him to Good Will Hunting. He found that information was easily accessible. That's all education should be. Information that you have to absorb like a sponge. He utterly detested school.
There's probably an aspect of it that was too easy for him.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have a lot of geniuses that just squeak by on low scores.
Because they just don't see the point of trying.
Passing all your tests, there you go. Don't bother with the projects.
Yeah, Howard just didn't see the point. And yet, he was smarter than all his classmates put together.
I wonder if they actually raised the standards for him to be challenged, if the results might be different.
It probably would have been. What was he doing in his final year when he should have been studying? Laboriously writing and rewriting the Shadow Kingdom, of course. Yeah, you can tell it's really good writing. It was the time of the oil boom in Cross Plains, and Howard found himself working for the men and enterprises that supported the oil industry. He hated the work even more than he hated school, and his myriad of sharp observations about boom towns and the people they inevitably attract made their way into his early writing. In the Kull stories, we see the strains of the more strident barbarism versus civilization debate that raged through the Conan stories. Within the tales of King Kull, the debate is framed, but not acted upon. Instead, we find corruption within and without the government, and Kull doesn't know whom to trust. Interesting that Howard would choose the snake as Kull's adversary, the biblical liar and deceiver of men who literally speaks with a forked tongue. I don't think it was coincidental. That was Howard making that conscious decision. And we have to bear in mind he probably did have a certain amount of religiosity and was far more educated in theology and religion than most people today would be. So he would have had a good understanding of the biblical stories because of how society back then all around the world was far more pious.
He was trying to make a point.
Yeah, and yeah, he definitely saw the ugliness of mankind when the oil boom hit Cross Plains. This civilization versus barbarism thing probably shaped somewhat by his experiences. Helping Kull in his quest to best the Serpent Men is the barbarian on the other side, Brull, the Spear Slayer. Just as the Atlanteans have yet to rise to the heights of their glory, the Picts of this time period have not begun the descent into savagery that we've seen in the Kull stories. Insofar as Kull the Atlantean hates the tribal Picts, they alone are canny enough to spot the Serpent Men for what they really are. Thus, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and barbarians on opposing sides join forces and through the fires of combat form an alliance and a friendship that will save the king's life on more than one occasion. And Kull is a character who needs saving from both himself and others. He is given to introspection as frequently as he grapples with flesh and blood foes. Brull proves to be the grounding force in the friendship, reminding Kull not to get too caught up in thinking at the expense of direct action. I don't know if I'd say in contrast to direct action, as I think that, yeah, Kull needs the grounding, but I don't know if Kull would end up doing nothing. He would act, because the trouble is I think he'd act a lot more impulsively when he'd be pushed to action, and that Brull helps temper some of his more extreme sides to himself. The difference is someone who is introspective versus being an extrovert. Brull is far more of an extrovert. Kull is an introvert. So they perfectly balance each other. I think that's the idea. But on the other hand, Kull is prone to very reckless action. Remember the Skull Fortress of Silence, I think it is?
Oh, yeah.
Kull nearly ended the world. Why? He decided to get reckless. It was Brull saying that time, I think, not a good idea, boss. These points alone should be enough to distinguish Kull from Conan for even the most casual reader. But hold on, here's where it gets interesting. Howard only sold 3 Kull stories, including Kull's guest appearance in the Branmak Morn story, Kings of the Night. 5 years later, as he was envisioning a new series set in a pseudo-historic time period, he knew that his character would rise from a wild tribal barbarian to become king of the grandest kingdom in his mythical age. Why not then start the tales of this character by showing him as a king? And so he took, by this axe eye rule, a then unsold Kull story, stripped it of all of the Volusian trappings, such as Kull struggling with the ancient law, and replaced them with material more in line with the new series. In fact, the only crucial plot element retained in both stories is the assassination attempt. The retitled Phoenix on the Sword introduced King Conan to the readers of Weird Tales magazine, and the rest is history. After the origins of the Conan story were discovered, it was just broadly assumed that Kull was Howard's first pass as a barbarian character, but astute readers like H.P. Lovecraft, who praised Howard on his unique character, could readily tell the difference. King Kull's journey is his attempt to find his own way, to lead a nation that he doesn't always understand. He seeks to hold on to his kingdom and still be true to himself, instead of what everyone expects of him. The Conan stories, on the other hand, aren't so much about him becoming king, but instead about the strange and wondrous career he had leading up to his kingship. There, Mark Finn did a great job wording it. Much as I like the journey of Conan to kingship, I think that Conan as king is far more interesting to a large extent. As for Kull, I would actually weirdly like to see more of how he became king. I think it's shown in a graphic novel sequel to this one, so we get shown it in a pastiche story, so I'm content. That said, maybe a Hour of the Dragon type story for Kull would have been interesting as well. Epic story with him and Brol teaming up and fighting to save the world.
I know that when I first read the Kull stories, here it is, we had the first Kull story, and then we skipped a while, and it's like, okay, I'm lost. Did I miss some stories?
Yeah, we've got a few other King Kull stories, but nothing more. In the stories of Kull, we see him grappling with larger philosophical questions and in general following his instincts, even as he is compelled to obey the rule of law. The contradictions are what define King Kull and his trusted aide, Brol. Okay, trusted aide, I don't know if I'd describe Brol that way. Trusted aide suggests that he's a subordinate. Brol is not a subordinate.
Probably be better worded as sworn brother.
So to describe it as, he's his trusted aide. So does he also do Kull's laundry? Like, what does he do on the weekends? Does he also go fetch his slippers? My point is just that trusted aide implies subordinate. And while yes, to an extent, but in universe, Kull and Brol never think of themselves in that context. A little more Baroque. If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it, as Cogsworth would put it in Beauty and the Beast. I love that joke.
I've heard it a lot.
Yeah, well, that joke ain't Baroque, Dan.
Oh, Goff.
More exotic and more measured than Conan, and every bit his own man. He'll always hold the distinction of being Robert E. Howard's first barbarian king. Yeah, Mark Finn, North Texas, Juin 2009. Mark Finn is an award-winning Robert E. Howard scholar and author of Blood and Thunder, The Life and Art of Robert E. Howard, among other works. Okay, I didn't know that. Mark Finn is obviously a very, very brilliant scholar with an interesting area of focus. I don't know what else to add. I know his book, Blood and Thunder, has been recommended to us. Maybe after we finish with the letters of Howard over on Instagram, maybe we'll get into reading this. We do have to continue our Slaying the Dragon podcast.
You know what? I am glad that there are some who want to show that there's a huge difference between Conan and Kull. Because sure, you can make an argument that Kull was essentially the prototype for Conan.
But on the other hand, he is his own character. Let us know in the comment section what you think of this video and of this thesis by Mark Finn. Don't forget to, if you enjoyed this video, smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were King Kull smashing his enemies to itty bitty pieces.